Today we're going to talk about fraying fabric in our quilting tip. What do we do when our fabric frays and how do we keep that from happening? I'm Mary from Joyful and Mary Quilting, and I'm going to show you exactly that. When do fabrics fray? What does that mean? Fabrics fray when the woven fibers of your fabric start to unravel and the individual threads of the fabric are exposed along the edges. It really depends on the fabric you're using, of course, but all fabrics fray eventually. So I'm going to give you 5 suggestions on how to keep your fabrics from fraying or what to do when they do fray. But we're only going to talk about 100% cotton or quilting fabric in this tip. When you purchase fabric, the selvage or the bound edge will not fray. This is the selvage or the bound edge. It usually has the manufacturer's information on it, and it is bound, so the threads do not fray. But when you take it to the fabric store and they cut your fabric for you, they cut the edge crosswise perpendicular to the selvage edge and the fraying begins. Why does that happen? Because those fibers have now been released. They are bound here. They've been released here and they want to come apart, and that's what they're doing. So let's look at our 100% cotton fabrics, and we'll talk about which fabrics fray more than others. I bought this piece of fabric, half-yard piece, just like this, and all it's been doing is sitting on a shelf. But you can see those fibers are releasing and those threads are beginning to show. I haven't done anything to them other than put them on my shelf. And this is a good quality quilting fabric. It has a tight weave. It really has all the good things that it should have, but as I said, all fabric frays. Now, if you look at this type of fabric, this is called homespun. It has a really loose weave to it. So homespun, we have to be careful with. In addition, if you have older fabrics in your storage, you can tell by the color and the print on this, this is an older fabric. There was a time when I did pre-wash my fabrics. I don't do that anymore. That's a controversy we're not going to get into here. But when we pre-wash our fabrics and dry them, the fraying can be totally unmanageable. This piece, as you can see, frayed to the point that I've cut it apart. It was a knot. The fabric was a huge knot. And I had to cut all those pieces in order to untie it, and then I folded it back up again. That happens when we don't do anything to that edge other than cut it. So one remedy for that is if you purchase fabric that you are not ready to use, or if you pre-wash your fabrics, my first tip is pink the edges. You can use either a pinking blade or pinking shears. When you pink those edges all the way around, other than the selvage edge, you're not going to pink that, you don't need to, it's already bound. And then you pre-wash or store, either one, that edge is going to stay just like this, and you're not going to see the fraying like you would when it's just a cut edge. My second tip to prevent fraying is before cutting your fabrics, press them with a pressing solution. You can use Mary Ellen's Best Press, Magic Premium Quilting and Crafting Spray, or even a no-flake starch or sizing. When you spray the fabric first, and then you press it, and then you cut it, this is going to keep those threads anchored together when you're cutting them, and it will help to avoid fraying. Now, if you look at this piece, when I purchased, it was actually a half-yard piece. When I purchased, this is the edge that was cut at the quilt shop right here. So you can see I got it home, it already started to fray. Before I cut this piece, I sprayed it with some pressing solution, and then I cut my 2.5-inch strip. And there is a noticeable difference. I could feel it when I cut it. I can see it here. The fraying has been put at bay a bit. Again, all fabric frays. There's going to be some pieces that will come off, but not as much as when it's been left alone and not sprayed. So, point number 2, press your fabrics with a pressing solution before you cut them. Number 3, handle your pieces carefully. When you're cutting or when you're piecing, do not tug at your pieces. Handle them gently. When you pull the edges as you are cutting them or as you are piecing them, that can cause those threads to release, fraying, and you are not going to have an accurately cut piece any longer once you lose all of that. As you can see from this piece, it is pieced I sprayed all of the fabrics before I cut the pieces, and then I cut them, and this is not fraying. There's going to be a little release on the edge. That's just all there is to it. It is so much more accurate. It's so much easier to work with. In addition, when you are cutting your fabric with either a poor quality or a dull rotary cutting blade, that can tear the fibers rather than neatly cut them. Fraying. When the fibers are torn, it pulls the threads from the fabric all along the edge, and this is what you end up with. As you can see, this poor quality blade tore the fabric. This was just one swipe, that's all I did. The fabric has been basically torn rather than a clean cut, causing all of that fraying just from that one pass of the rotary cutting blade. It's really important to remember some fabrics are more susceptible to fraying than others, so stretching or tugging on any of your fabric pieces makes each one of them more susceptible. And if your fabric is fraying while you're piecing, those loose threads can get caught on your sewing machine foot, causing inaccurate and uneven seams. When you are cutting, you want to make sure that I'm going to cut a 1.5 inch piece here. I have a blade that is sharp. As I cut, I'm going to pass one time. If I cannot get a clean cut after one pass, I need to replace my blade. That means it's either dull, or there's a nick in it, or it's a poor quality blade. You'll never go back and forth sawing the fabric apart. You will only have one pass. Close your cutter and check to make sure that you have a nice, clean, frayless edge. Number 4, if there is fraying, do not pull the threads out. As we put our quilt top together, the fraying just happens because we are handling the fabrics, we are putting them under our sewing machine, and it's releasing those threads as we do that. Again, if we follow those first 3 steps, the chances of major fraying will be greatly decreased, but it's still going to happen. And again, depending on the fabrics, it might happen more than we would like. So if there is this fraying, you can see I've got fraying on all of these seams. Some it doesn't matter. If the threads that have frayed off are on the back of a dark fabric, they are not going to show through on the front. Just leave them. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to cut them. Just leave them unless they're going to get in the way when you're sewing. If you have threads that are darker, and they may show through on the other side of your quilt, on the right side, once you're done quilting it. The way that you get rid of those, again, do not pull ever. You're just going to take some nice sharp scissors or some nippers, and you're going to just cut those all the way along the edge. Do not pull them out if you can help it. You're just going to do that trimming, especially here. See, I've got some red thread that's showing on the other side of my yellow. I don't want that because that will show through on the front. I want to get rid of those pieces before I quilt my quilt. You can do that along the edge as well, but you want to make sure you cut those off first because, again, they can get caught on your sewing machine. If you're sending them to a long armor, they're going to have to do the trimming. And when you're trying to bind your quilt, it is next to impossible to sew your binding without cutting off all those excess threads first. So you'll want to do that. You'll want to make sure that you are using sharp scissors because dull scissors, again, will tear those threads rather than cut them, and that will cause even more threads to be separated from the fabric. It's kind of a cascading event. You pull one thread, that releases the next one, that releases the next one, and pretty soon you want to make sure that you still have a nice seam allowance here. Now, let's say that maybe threads did get pulled out and maybe you sewed it a little inaccurately and your seam allowance is getting very small, too close to our seam. You might want to then use some fray check. There's fray check, there's other products that are similar. Just put a little bit right on that spot. You can also take a little piece of fusible interfacing and press it to that area. It's not going to show on the front and it's going to keep that in check. It's actually going to cover that seam area and give you the added strength that you need. Number 5, you want to make sure that when you are piecing, you don't use dull pins, because dull pins can also cause a problem pulling those threads away. If you're putting a pin in your seams to hold them together and it's either too large or it's dull or it has a burr on it, that can also add to that fraying. So make sure that your rotary blades are sharp, your scissors are sharp, and your pins are sharp when you're quilting. In a nutshell, we simply need to use sharp rotary blades, sharp needles and pins, a pressing solution before we cut. We need to do a little hands-on research and handle our fabrics carefully. Do not pull those frayed threads off of our pieces, and if we do have some fraying, there are ways to handle that and to adjust for it. A careful look at each fabric before we begin will tell us which pieces need a little more TLC than the others. I am always trying to be joyful, but I will always be merry. Thank you so much for watching.